Hi guys, I am excited today. I'm always excited when I get to talk about cameras and lenses, but I'm especially excited when I get to talk about really great value lenses. And this right here is one of the best lenses that I have ever tested, under $200. That's right, this lens is under $200 and it is a 0.95 lens, a 35 millimeter 0.95 for under $200. And here's the kicker. It's a really great lens. Sometimes you get really budget lenses and, you pay budget prices, you get budget results, but not with this lens. With this lens, you are going to get absolutely fantastic results. It is not a perfect lens by any means. However, it is really, really great at the things that it needs to be great at. This is by the company Bright & Star, and Bright & Star makes some really fantastic lenses, and this is an all manual lens. So for those of you who are out there and you like to use autofocus only, this lens is not for you. But for those of you who like to manually focus, be more of a part of your photography. A lot of photographers like to say that they feel like they're making the photo when they use a manual lens. And that is certainly how I feel. I haven't had enough coffees yet today, but it is how I feel when I'm using a manual lens. I feel like I am making the photograph. It makes you take your time, makes you frame up your shot properly. And when you nail the focus, boy, oh boy, and this lens, let me tell you something, at 0.95, one of the big problems with the budget lenses that have that low of an aperture at 0.95 is that it's often very soft at 0.95. Not this lens. This lens is sharp at 0.95. It gets a little bit sharper as you stop it down, but the images are very usable at 0.95, which is remarkable. I am really blown away by that. And not only that, its close-up image quality, even at 0.95, is also very good and very sharp. And you can focus at 37 centimeters, and that is pretty good at the 35 millimeter focal length. So to be having a usable, sharp image at 0.95 at the minimum focus distance, another thing that has really surprised me about this lens. Now, this lens is available for almost all mounts, APS-C and micro four thirds. So you have a Canon RF, you have a Canon M mount camera even, you have Nikon Z, Fuji X, Sony E, or any of the micro four thirds cameras. What you're looking at with this lens is the equivalent of a full frame, roughly 50 millimeter f1.4 on your APS-C camera. That's the thing about APS-C cameras, what a lot of people, and micro four thirds as well, but what a lot of people complain about with these smaller sensors is the noise, the lack of light, because it has that smaller sensor, so it has smaller light gathering capabilities. But when you have a lens that lets in so much light, like 0.95, you mitigate that problem. So you can have super clean images and you can keep your ISO low. And in low light shooting, this is a low light monster, because at 0.95, you can go out in the middle of the night and take photos and they're still going to be sharp and clean. Oh, and I should mention, I contacted Bright & Star and asked them to send a copy of this lens for review, and they were kind enough to do so at no cost to myself, so let that factor in where you will. But personally, I buy a lot of manual focus lenses anyway, so if they hadn't sent it to me, I would have purchased it and then reviewed it. Now, 35 millimeter on APS-C cameras is an extremely popular focal length, so it sort of emulates what the human eye sees, kind of makes your pictures look more real to life, which makes this a fantastic lens for general purpose photography. You want to travel around, you want to do street photography, you want to do food photography. Let's say you're walking around and you're Instagramming your food, whatever green beans that you ate that day, you can use this lens for that, and you can get that razor thin depth of field, so you can create some really interesting looks even on things like food that are close up, keeping something in focus and everything else blurred out. You can do that with your street photography as well. Pick a spot, make that one line razor thin depth of field so that that's in focus and everything else is blurred out. It can create some really interesting, unique photography. Now, this lens can also be great for portrait photography, you know, head and shoulder shots of people. So if you have lots of friends, like I don't, you could go around taking portraits. You could get into portrait photography with this, and having a 0.95, you just nail focus on that eye, and then you could obliterate the background and get some really nice looking portraits. Of course, you don't have to go all the way down to 0.95, but you can if that is the look you are going for, and all of this for under $200. And of course, nighttime and low light photography. If you are in a lot of situations where there isn't a lot of light around, this lens is definitely for you. You are simply not going to find a brighter lens at a lower price point that will give you as good of an image that you are going to get out of this lens. So if you're a low light shooter, this is your jam. And let's take a look at the construction of this lens. It is fantastic. It has a clicking aperture ring with these nice dull thuds when you click it. Oh, I just really like the way the aperture ring clicks on this. And then a very smooth focus throw, which you are going to need when you are manually focusing. You want your focus to be absolutely smooth and precise. Of course, it has a focus chart on the bottom to help you out there. But what I like to do is I actually punch in 2 times on my LCD or my EVF, and then I just slowly manual focus. And I have had not that much trouble manually focusing this even at 0.95. However, that is going to be the major consideration when you are trying to shoot at 0.95 is that you may not get everything in focus unless you are an experienced manual shooter. So you do have to take your time with this lens if you are going to use that razor thin depth of field. But if you do use that razor thin depth of field and you do nail focus, the images are fantastic. And it also comes with a nice metal lens cap that just goes on so smoothly. Oh, very satisfying. Well, look at this. It's closed all the way down to f/16, and watch me open that up to 0.95. Look at that right there. That is beautiful. And the lens itself is just dead simple, all metal. There is no weather sealing to speak of, just a nice metal finish. But this manual lens, like things with manual lenses, there's not a lot of parts to break or go wrong. So as long as you take decent care of your lens, it can last for decades, and it's just got great construction, and it has nice etchings here for the numbers and the letters that are on the lens. It's got a nice bit of weight to it, well balanced. It feels really good in the hand or wherever else you'd like to put it. And I absolutely love taking this out on my APS-C cameras. I use this a lot on my Sony a6700. Goes really well on something like a Fuji X-T20, or really any APS-C or Micro Four Thirds camera that you want to use. So to talk about the specifics of the performance, like I said, for sharpness, you're just getting an extremely sharp lens at all apertures. So even at 0.95, sharp gets even sharper when you stop it down to f1.4 or f2. Stays razor sharp until diffraction kicks in at probably around f11 or f16. So I was shooting this a lot at 5.6 and f8 because I like to use it for street photography when I'm going around. But you will see at the brighter f-stops, the corners will be softer than the center. But for me, with a lens like this, that's like a 50mm equivalent, you're usually not looking for corner to corner sharpness. You're usually focused on the thing that is in the center of your photo anyway. So that's for street photography, for portraits, things like that. You're not really looking at the very edges, not like you would with something like a landscape lens. So to me, a bit of corner softness at the very bright apertures is no big deal at all. Especially when you're down at 0.95, you're often trying to blow out the background. You're trying to get blurry backgrounds anyway at that low f-stop, so you're not really focused on what the corners are doing. So I am extremely pleased and surprised with how sharp this lens is. Barrel distortion was another nice surprise for me because there is very little barrel distortion, so you don't really have to correct that in post, which is great for me. I like to take a lot of pictures of buildings. I live in a big city with a lot of giant buildings, so I like those straight lines when I am taking my close-up photos of those buildings. So I don't like it when it warps so much because that is a pain to fix in post. So this has a very minimal amount of barrel distortion, which I think is great. Now you will see some chromatic aberration when you're pixel peeping down at f.95, but when you have a lens this bright, you have to expect that to happen. My G Master, my 24mm 1.4 G Master, has plenty of chromatic aberration and longitudinal chromatic aberration when you're stopped all the way down to 1.4, because when you're letting in that much light in a lens, it is very hard to eliminate chromatic aberration entirely. But I think this lens does a pretty good job of controlling it, and chromatic aberration you can eliminate pretty easily in post, so that's not much of a big deal. And longitudinal chromatic aberration is harder to eliminate in post. However, with this type of focal length, a 35mm on APS-C cameras, then you aren't probably going to see a lot of chromatic aberration or longitudinal chromatic aberration in your day-to-day shooting. It's just with the types of pictures you will be taking with this lens, the CA and the Loca probably won't be big factors for you. And that's what I mean when I say this lens, while not perfect, the things it does right are the important things. Now, when it comes to flaring, this is what most people will probably think is the biggest drawback of this lens, depending on your perspective on flare. Now, personally, I love it when I get crazy, weird flares. It just reminds me of old vintage photography. So if I'm out doing some street photography and then once in a while I get a real crazy flare, sometimes that makes the whole picture for me. And if you're down at 0.95, you're going to get some crazy flares on this lens if you are looking directly at a bright light or especially the sun. Now, if you stop it down to 1.4 or f2, you are going to virtually eliminate all flaring. So to me, it's kind of the best of both worlds in that I can get crazy flares if I want them, but if I don't want them, I just have to stop it down a little bit and those flares disappear. And the great news is, even with those crazy flares at 0.95, it retains contrast and there's not much ghosting. So you can still get really cool pictures that have crazy flares going through them. But if you're someone that wants to shoot wide open a lot and you do not like any flares in your photos, then you're going to have to look elsewhere because this lens is not for you. Now, when it comes to the bokeh of this lens, did I say it right? Probably not. But when it comes to the out of focus backgrounds on this lens, it's a bit of a mixed bag. For the most part, I'm absolutely in love with it. 90% of my shots, I really like the way the background is separated from my subject, and it's nice, smooth fall off, and it looks really good. The problem comes when subjects are close to the background. So if there's a lot of busyness in the background, the bokeh can look a little bit busy, but for the most part, it looks really nice and creamy just once in a while when things are very close to your subject and there's a lot going on in the scene. You can get a little bit of messy bokeh. Now, the bokeh balls themselves are very nice. They are clean. There is no onion ringing. You will see the aperture blades a little bit when you are all the way to 0.95 and you're zoomed all the way in. But to me, it is more than acceptable at this price point. I think the bokeh balls look great. And you do see a little outlining and a little halo when you are down at 0.95. But overall, I'm extremely pleased with the bokeh and how the background is rendered when it is out of focus. Really, really great for this lens. But you see what I mean when I talk about what a great value this lens is? It is under $200 and it is a fantastic optical performer in the areas that you would like to see when you are shooting at 35mm. So I want to thank Bright & Star for sending this thing out and for making this and making us realize there is more that you can get out of lower priced manual lenses than I previously thought. So thanks for watching this. I hope it helps. If you're not interested in this type of lens, let me know what kind of focal lengths you are interested in, and hopefully we can get some more reviews on the channel. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.